Welcome to Women in Leadership Talk, where you'll hear from successful women who are empowering other women with their stories of adversity, resiliency, and success. And here is your host, Vicki Bradley, founder and CEO of Women in Leadership Empowered.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Women in Leadership Talk podcast. Thank you all for chiming in today. We're excited that you're here, and we're so excited to have Shanarra Goode joining us today. Shanarra, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're thrilled to have you and excited to get into this conversation. Talking about a topic that I think a lot of people are going to resonate with, and we'll just see where we land with this conversation today. But I've been looking forward to this ever since we booked our date.
I know.
So let me give the audience a little bit of background on you so they know why we're talking. And, Shanarra and I had a great conversation about a month or 6 weeks ago or so. And we were like, okay, we got to keep this conversation going. So we've invited her onto our show today. So her background is a very dynamic retail professional. She's got over a decade of experience across both corporate retail giants and nimble startups, working mostly in the beauty, personal care, apparel, and home industries. She's had this beautiful journey of, lots of different types of businesses, big, medium, small, emerging. So I think today's conversation, she's going to be able to really give us some great context as to what leaders go through as they navigate some of these. She's also the founder of The Good Guide, which is this fabulous podcast. I joined her a while back on her podcast. And so you got to make sure you check that out. But really, her vision is to see minority women leading with authenticity and confidence in every single space they occupy, whether that's a professional, being a mother, a wife, innovators. But she's really driven by this commitment to empowering women to take risk, speak their minds, and succeed without compromising who they are. So that's a very big purpose, Shanarra. And thank you for that. You and I, that's why you and I get along well, because we both have this drive to really want to support women in being their authentic, confident, courageous selves in every aspect of their life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you for being here today.
Of course. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me. It's funny because I know I'm only still, like I mentioned in my bio, like a little over a decade in, but I feel like I've made so many bold moves and decisions throughout my career. Oftentimes, while I had some influence or kind of some guidance from mentors or previous bosses, etc., I really did feel like I was making a lot of those career moves in a silo or blindly, and while at the time they were very scary to make, I think in hindsight, like obviously I've been able to learn so much, and it's allowed me to really morph into the leader that I am now. I think at the end of the day, like I've always made decisions just based off of what I felt was right for me at the time. And that's always what I encourage, anyone that I'm leading or mentoring, that's how they should make decisions as well. So happy to be here today.
I love that. So trusting yourself, that wherever this path takes you, you're there for a reason. And it's an opportunity to learn, expand, grow yourself.
Absolutely.
Love that. Yeah. So one of the things you and I had spoke about, and I felt like this would be a great conversation to have with our audience or for them to be able to share in, is that the leadership journey, right? Like so many people think, it's great because when I'm at the top, I get to make all the decisions, everything's wonderful. And I remember one of my favorite mentors, he asked me one time, he said, so Vicki, be careful what you wish for. Because I said, I want your job. And he goes, be careful what you wish for. And I said, are you nervous? I'm going to take your job. And he goes, it's really lonely at the top. And that really impacted me. And then when you and I spoke, we talked about this loneliness that a person can feel, or they might experience when they're on this leadership
Yeah.
journey. And I
Yeah.
thought this would be a great conversation to have today, just to maybe expand on that, and what might be some of the emotions or feelings that come up for different people as they navigate their
Yeah.
journeys.
Yeah, no, it's so funny. I think this is very much like a parallel that I experienced even just post grad. There's in college you learn a lot about whether you're a business major or you're a communications major or whatever your major is. You learn very much about what that topic is, right? You have classes and you are studying, and what you never actually learn about is kind of that post grad life of like what it's going to look and feel like. And then I think for me in particular, kind of that compounded on top of the fact that like I've always had these natural, this not and natural desire to lead and to really break the status quo and kind of try new things and again be bold. I think it even created this lonelier space or more lonely space for me because I then again, like I alluded to at the beginning, was making decisions that allowed me to take risks and try new things. But to your point, as you move and groove throughout your career, as you grow upward, it gets lonelier, more lonely and more lonely along the way. And so I think in particular, as I've made this transition from being kind of a newer enroll manager, leading a team to now being a director level leading the team, like I feel that more than ever.
Mm.
My peer group has shrunk. I feel like every single time you move up, you go from having a large variety of peers to even smaller to even smaller. Like it really is that pyramid model. And so now I went from having probably like 20 different peers to now only having four same level peers. And even that is so drastic because God forbid you guys don't have the same leadership styles or communication styles or just personally aren't similar in personality. And so when it comes to having people to bounce ideas off of or strategize with, like it starts to feel a little bit like you are making decisions solo. And so I
Mm.
think when they say it's lonelier at the top, that's what they're alluding to, is the people that you can sit across from the table and truly be equals with or approach things from an equal mindset with are fewer and farther between.
Yeah.
And so that selection of people have to be almost even more kind of, I don't know, it's harder to find those connections when you already are picking from such a smaller, group.
Yeah. Yeah. You highlight a number of things there as you're saying that, because you're absolutely right.
Hmm.
It shrinks, right?
Yeah.
And that has a ripple effect
Hmm.
because those looking up to
Hmm.
you are saying,
Hmm.
oh, there's less and less
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
someone that looks, feels, sounds like
Yep.
me to
Yep.
model, right?
Yep.
So I hear that a lot,
Yep.
especially from women, right? Because
Hmm.
there's such a lack of, truly, of women in
And
these
yeah,
executive
leadership roles.
leadership roles.
Yeah.
And so the question becomes, why am I doing this if
Hmm.
there's nobody
Hmm.
there?
Yeah.
And there's lots of different ways to look at that, right?
Yeah.
Because you could say, oh, well, I'm going to create the path so that
Correct.
more
Yeah.
people can follow
Yep.
along, right?
Yep.
Or come up with me.
Yeah.
Or in some cases, people will say, maybe I should rethink my path.
Mm-hmm.
And
Hmm.
so they might make choices to walk away.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that becomes really interesting.
Yeah.
And when you become, um, when there's fewer of you,
Yeah.
then sometimes it's harder to be heard, right?
Oh,
Especially from your
absolutely.
colleagues or your boss.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So maybe talk a little bit about that, like what your experiences have been like, and
Yeah.
how have you navigated making sure that your voice gets heard.
Yeah. This is something that I like to share or teach or remind my team of, is that when you're in a role, right, you have to learn to insert yourself into spaces. at the end of the day, like, you're getting paid to do a job. You're not getting paid to sit back and kind of like watch while things happen around you. If anything, that's the exact opposite of what they're paying you to do. And so for me, I always like to use the term of like, take the seat at the table. Like, don't expect for people to make space for you. You need to ask people to scoot over to the left and scoot over to the right so that you can shimmy yourself in sometimes. And I think for me, that's always been my approach. Like, I'm paid to be here. I have thoughts and ideas, and I've got a perspective that I feel is worth a moment in this conversation. Now, there's a way in which you go about that, obviously, right? Like, I can't take every turn to raise my hand and make my voice heard, but I do think that you have to be willing to take up space, and especially as a woman in a leadership role, like, we're seeing that more and more of like women being more comfortable with quote unquote taking up space, but there's still so much room for improvement there. And so I think for me, that's my approach to how I lead and to how I tell my team that they should learn to lead is take up space. Like, don't be afraid to work your way in there. Eventually people start to, as they see your interest and your passion, I think people are attracted to passion.
Of
And so
course.
for me, people knock on my door because they know now that I'm going to be someone that says something or contributes to a conversation. And so I think there's a little bit of give and take. You have to give to get.
Love that. Love that.
Yeah.
Well, and that plays nicely into, you're hearing yourself, you're hearing your voice is being heard, you're sharing, right? But what you said about there's a way to do it, 100%,
Absolutely.
because taking up space is mental, physical, emotional, right? Like, we'll hear stories about, you get the Superman pose, or if you're sitting at a table, like,
box the elbows out. Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, really making sure you're physically
Yeah.
taking up space as much as even your own mental, right? Like, preparing yourself when you go into a meeting with someone. And if you think it's going to be one of those where it might be challenging to be heard, being very intentional, to your point, of sharing.
For sure.
Love
And,
that.
I think also too, especially in this world of Zoom, I actually think what tends to help me in some of those situations or help me to be heard is ensuring that I'm hearing other people. So I think picking up on cues, like, especially again, as I'm leading meetings, it's like picking up on clues of someone coming off of mute and like remuting really quickly. Like, you have to be tuned into some of those smaller mannerisms also, whether that, and, if I'm off of Zoom, it's who's starting to lean in, who's starting to kind of like open their mouth a little bit, but then shutting it, like who starts to raise their eyebrows. Like, it's sometimes it's also reading the room. And as you make space for other people, they make space for you as well. So, kind of going back to the statement of you have to give to get, like, it is a two-way street. And so a lot of times being heard means you have to also hear other people.
Absolutely. I love the tips you just shared, and re-emphasizing you have to give to get. Like, that's so important.
Yep.
And also, when you were talking about being very intentional with what it is that you are, you want to leave the room with, right? Like, that is so important. So you're still young in your career, and you're navigating it quite well. So
thank you.
what do you feel like have been, like, what are some of those challenges that if you could rewind a decade, what would you have wanted somebody to share with you?
I think someone did share this with me, and I think it was really a turning moment in my mindset of how when you are used to, I won't lie, like, I've been very fortunate throughout my life. I've had people that have opened doors for me and who have put me in certain path, like along certain paths that I've done the work to get there, yes, but they've allowed me to really, take up space in those realms. So I've always known about myself and been confident in my abilities. That's never been something that I've doubted, like, very gratefully, I've been blessed with that. But with that also comes ego at times.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget an old boss of mine. I had moved to New York, and I had decided to leave my company, and I was I didn't love it. I felt like I had made the wrong decision, and I was, like, oh gosh, I might need to come back and blah blah blah. And I was talking to her, and I was like, man, if I come back though, like how embarrassing will that be? Like how embarrassing would I look? And she goes, you need to check your ego at the door. She was like, that's ego talking. Because if you're not happy with something, if something's gone wrong and you need to now backpedal, who cares?
Yeah.
Like if you are making your decisions based off of what other people are going to, how they're going to respond or react to the decision that you've made, then you're doing it for the wrong reasons, and you're allowing your ego to lead. So I would say for me, the best piece of advice that I got, thankfully, early on was just to be mindful of like where your ego is when you're making certain decisions. I think a lot of times in the world of, like climbing the corporate ladder is always better. There are times where you need to sit back and realize maybe this is where I need to be right now, or maybe taking that promotion isn't necessarily what I need right now. So just being humble and intuitive enough to know when it's ego and when there's actually like a desire or a need for something bigger, better, or lesser,
Yeah, that's a great example. And what a great mentor you had and
Yeah.
boss, right? Like,
Yes, yeah.
I mean, they could have taken a very different approach and
Mhm.
said, yeah, you made the decision. You're on your own now. Live with
Mhm.
it, right?
Mhm.
But that's some really awesome advice,
Mhm.
and helpful as you navigate other
Yeah.
opportunities,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. Yep.
So I'm going to switch gears just a little bit,
Yep.
because when you talk about tapping into that previous boss, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Like, I want to talk about networking a little bit,
Yeah.
because often what I see, men are great at networking.
Mhm.
They're out there on the golf course. I mean, we
Yeah.
all know the
Yeah.
stereotype, right? They go to
Yeah.
have beers after work kind of thing. For women, it becomes a little bit
Mhm.
harder, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Because of other responsibilities.
For sure.
So, what are some things that you've done yourself personally to really grow your net worth
Mhm.
through your
Mhm.
network?
For me, what I think it is that I just genuinely enter into social spaces, especially in the work. It's funny. I slight tangent, but I actually think I'm a more vulnerable person at work than I am in my personal life. And I actually think that has been really helpful in my networking journey. People, I think what I find in the workspace is like people just want to feel like they're a part of something, that they
Okay.
want to feel like they're a part of something, that they're being included, that they're being heard. Um, we spend 40 hours and oftentimes more a week with people that we work with.
Yeah.
And so to me, it always has felt like if I'm going to give something of myself to people, I'm going to do it in the workplace, because that to me is where I'm spending the majority of my time.
Okay.
So I think one of my tips is be willing to be vulnerable in the workplace. And I feel like that's the exact opposite of what the patriarchy has led us to believe,
Mhm.
And being vulnerable, like, let me be clear, that does not mean, like, please do not connect vulnerability to emotion. It's not about being someone who's willing to cry in a meeting or willing to share their deepest, darkest secrets. Like, that's not what it is. It's a presence that you exude. It's, again, the willingness to listen and to share. That is vulnerability. And I actually think that that's what women have well beyond kind of men. Like, that's something that I actually think that we do really well. We are
Yeah.
relatable, we're vulnerable. And so to me, I would just say use that. Like, use that as the upper hand. Find the way in which it works for you, but don't be afraid to allow that to connect you to somebody, because networking, all it is connectivity. So for me, I have found my best, or people have reached out to me, or I reach out to people that I feel like there is a personal connection there because of a story, a moment of vulnerability that I felt that they exuded in a conversation.
Nice, nice. I love how you shared that, and on several aspects. One, that vulnerability. Yes, I do think that is a superpower that
Mhm.
most women have. Not all,
Yeah.
because
Not
I have
all,
seen
but
some
yeah. Yeah.
who struggle with that.
Mhm.
But there is this unsaid
Mhm.
rule in corporate,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? I remember one time an HR leader, she came to me and she said, Vicki, I need some advice. Like, what do I
Mhm.
do when somebody starts crying?
Mm.
And I looked at her and I said, well, what do you do when they start laughing?
Yeah.
She went, what? And I said, it's an emotion,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
she could be crying because she's happy,
Yeah.
right? She could be crying for lots of different reasons. I said, so
Yeah.
you have to unpack like
Mhm.
where it's coming from,
Mhm.
right? Is she an
Mhm.
emotional wreck every day, coming in
Yeah.
crying? Is it
Yeah.
like one
Yeah.
time kind of thing? But this connectivity that you're talking
Mhm.
about, I think COVID really amplified
Yes.
the
Oh my gosh.
need for it,
Oh my
right?
gosh.
And like you and
Tenfold.
I, we've never met in person.
Yeah.
We've been
Yeah.
virtual,
Yeah.
right? And so now
Yeah.
we have this connection
Yeah.
that is virtual. And it's like you're sitting in my living room. We're having this
Yeah.
conversation
Yeah.
today,
Yeah.
right? And so I guess where I'm going with this is that connectivity is so important in your career because you do
Mhm.
spend a lot of time in your career,
Mhm.
but it's also goes back to that loneliness,
Yeah.
right? Like if
Yep.
you don't have that person in your
Mhm.
organization,
Mhm.
how are you finding that person outside of your organization that can
Yep.
mentor, support you, bounce ideas off of, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and we don't, I do it a lot because I'm an extrovert and I love
Mhm.
it, but I know it's not easy for a lot of people. And
Yeah.
so, I think it's important, like, because I think one thing you and I talked about before too is, if somebody were to look at a different a country,
Mhm.
right? Like
Mhm.
again, how do you integrate yourself into that country?
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe talk a little bit about that, Shanarra. Like,
Yeah.
if let's just do a whiteboard or
Yeah.
a magic question. If you were to transport
Yeah.
to another country,
Yeah.
how would you go about making that connectivity?
You know, to me, it's funny. I'm actually a big solo traveler. I love going on trips alone, and I've done a 2 month stint in London. I spent 2 weeks in France. To me, it's while there's a lot of cultural assimilation that needs to be done, right? Like needing to understand what culturally is important to certain people or just certain countries that you're in. For me, it's immersion though. At the end of the day, like it's showing up to places that probably make you a little uncomfortable. It's
Mm.
sitting at the bar solo and not looking at your phone.
Mhm.
It's looking around the room and checking on other maybe like solo people that are there. But it's at the end of the day, it's immersion. You can't expect, no matter whether you're in the workplace, a different country, you can't expect to enter into any space, any four walls, and just stand there and think the feeling of loneliness or fulfillment like won't won't be filled, or like the feeling of loneliness won't be removed, the feeling of fulfillment will just come. Like you have to put yourself into, like, force your way. It's kind of the same thing that we were talking about earlier, like taking a seat at the table. You have got to force your way in. You've got to try new things and make yourself uncomfortable. And so to me, like that's how I would approach if I were at a different company in a different country. It's like, how am I showing up? How am I trying to meet and greet and show people my interest?
Mhm.
I think that's really, we are very self-centered. I think people in general, right? I'm not gonna, maybe I shouldn't generalize, but I do think that oftentimes we're self-centered in the fact that we just think that we're supposed to show up and things just kind of fall in our laps.
Mhm.
And it's work. Like networking has the work has the word work in it. It takes work. Like
Yes.
it takes action. And so to me, I just think that you really have to be intentional again about forcing your way in, about really getting outside of your comfort zone. And you can do that whether you are someone who are deemed introverted or extroverted. Like, that is still something that work still has to be done.
Nice. I love it. I love it. And I mean, I know it's very easy for you to do that. So, and for me as well, like I'm very comfortable doing that, but I know it's not for a lot of
For
people.
everyone.
So
Yeah, for sure.
what are the benefits
Yeah.
of, in your mind, what are the benefits of, inserting yourself and making your space known and starting that connection with somebody?
Yeah. I think it's leaving a mark. I think it's being your authentic self. I think whether you are, and I was talking to someone the other day and they were like, being introverted or extroverted is not a personality trait, first and foremost. That is how you either, that's how you, what's the term I'm looking for? How you re-energize.
Yeah.
Do you re-energize around people or not around people? But introversion and extroversion is not a personality trait. So I think that's one, first and foremost, like what I would recommend if you do quote unquote identify as someone who's introverted, like maybe strip that out and say, what are the actual personality traits that like I'm tied to? So that's one thing that I wanted to say before I answer your
That's
question.
great.
But I think that the benefits to it is, who wants to walk around having no one ever know like who they are, if that makes sense. I think again, going back to like what we all of us just want to be remembered and known for something. We want to leave behind a legacy. We want someone to see us, whether it's 10 people, whether it's 1,000,000 people, whether it's just one other person. And so to me, what I think of is like the benefit of networking, of putting yourself out there, is the connectivity, is the leaving behind something, is the making an impression. Imagine someone who also identifies as, oh gosh, it's really hard for me to break outside of my comfort zone. Being social is really uncomfortable. Imagine someone like that is always watching you and you're that person as well. Like, imagine that impression that you leave behind by just introducing yourself to one person. I think of that's how I make decisions in my life of how am I influencing the person after me.
Yeah.
And so that to me is like the benefit of it, is like the mark that you're leaving behind.
Yeah. And I love that. I love how you shape that conversation, because that is true no matter what, right? Like if you don't have the conversation and you just don't have regrets later, right?
Yeah.
And something you said about your phone, your head down on your phone. I was on a business trip. This was like in the last 6 months or so. And I was sitting at the bar in the evening.
Yeah.
And like I had my phone sitting there because I was waiting for somebody to message me for dinner. But I wasn't like on my phone. And then there was this gentleman sitting next to me and I was watching him and he's like doing this, right? He's looking around the room and he goes, I don't get it. He goes, like, we're all solo travelers and everybody has their head in the phone.
Yeah.
What's going on? But it was a fantastic icebreaker, right? Because then we all sort of went,
you're right.
Oh, yeah. Right. And we all started chatting. We had a fantastic conversation. It was like all of a sudden, like there was like 6 of us. All of a sudden we became friends, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. And so of course I always have to bring up the shadow side. So what is the risk if we don't do that?
I mean, in this day and age, let's be real. The risk is you talk to somebody that you have zero in common with, that offends you, that, I don't know, like who says something to the wrong, who makes some snide comment. That's the risk. But I would say the bigger risk is the regret. I think it's like the risk of regretting it if you say something, but regretting it if you don't. And for me, I think when you don't say something, there's still, the outcome is only one thing, nothing, right? Versus the outcome of making that connection. I mean, there's a world of opportunities that are now in front of you. There are so many doors that you could walk through now. So to me, the risk is so much bigger by not saying anything. You gain so much less, or you have the opportunity to gain so much less by not putting yourself out there, by not growing your network. So that's what I would say. I know it's kind of a non-answer, but like to me,
No,
that's
it's
the
actually,
truth.
I think
Yeah.
it's a perfect answer because you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. If you don't do it,
Hmm.
you have zero chance.
Correct. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Your
And you
outcome
don't
is you
know
meet nobody. You learn
exactly.
nothing. You have a conversation
Exactly.
with not a soul. So yeah.
And think about the people you have met in your life by,
Hmm.
I don't want to use the word chance because it's not chance because you were meant
Yeah.
to meet them. But
Yeah.
think about how some of those connections have
Oh my
grown and
gosh.
what's happened
Oh my
after
gosh.
meeting particular people in your life, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like some of my, I mean, think about every person that you've met, they've either taught you something or brought something into your life, like whether it be clarity, whether it be friendship, whether it be, whether it be mentorship, like every person that you've met and have actually sparked a genuine conversation with, like you've gained something from it. And so I think that's also too, like in the workplace, like what I try and think through as I'm entering in meetings with people that I don't like, I'm always learning something from somebody regardless. So yeah.
Love that. Love that. Well, and I'm glad, I thank you for tying that back because that's where I was going to go with this. Like,
Yeah.
this is not just in a social environment, like, this is
Yeah.
even within your own workplace.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll tell one quick story before we wrap up here. But
Yeah.
years ago, Women in Leadership Empowered, that's actually how it came to be because
Oh,
I was doing some work for a client who invited
yeah.
me in to work with 12 of their high potential females.
Yeah.
And they were from all different parts of the organization, and
Yeah.
none of them knew each other. And
Mm.
so the synergy that happened in that
Oh, I'm
time
sure.
working with them was
Amazing,
unbelievable.
I'm sure.
Yes, which is why I created Women in Leadership Empowered, because it's
Yeah.
like, how do we network, have peer to
Mhm.
peer mentoring, have the coaching that you need to help you navigate, but also really build those skills that are
Yep.
so important.
Yep.
So
Love it. Well,
I
that's
love that.
amazing.
Well, and I love that, Shanarra, like, you've shared so many wonderful tips here today.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter what stage you're in your career. It's more of
Yeah.
what you do with those stages, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you're never too late. And it's never too early either. Um, it's funny because early on in my career, I think I was very fortunate to work at a company that we like to deem ourselves like a relationship mindset
Mhm.
organization.
Nice.
Because at the end of the day, yes, we might all be marching towards better sales, better performance, better. But you can only get there together.
Mhm.
And to be together, you have to create relationships. And
Yeah.
so I think that's something to always be mindful of. Again, whether it's personal, whether it's professional, like we're not meant to go through life alone. So yeah.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. That's awesome. So maybe quickly,
Yeah.
what would be one thing you would want our audience to take away today and be able to actually implement?
Yeah. I would say I would challenge you to the next time that you're in a meeting, um, and especially like a group meeting, find someone that you connect with, like, and that doesn't mean that you've had a conversation with them, but find someone that, like, and you'll know, like, it's hard to say it that way, but like you'll whether you're in a Zoom meeting or an in-person meeting, you'll find someone that maybe you guys will like glance at each other a few times, or you might get a nod from them as you're saying something, or you might nod at them while they're saying something. But find someone in your next meeting and just reach out to them, whether it be Slack or whatever form of communication your company utilizes. But just reach out to them, ask them to, grab a coffee or compliment them on a topic that they brought up,
Mm,
or
love that.
their, boldness in a meeting. Like those little things go a long way. Because, just imagine, put yourself in that on the receiving end of that. And I also think that stuff like that is contagious. So definitely that's something that I would challenge them to do.
Love it. Positive breeds positive. Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. And just tell us about the Good Guide. Like what inspired the podcast and share with people how they find it, how they find you.
Yeah. So, yep. Like Vicki mentioned, it's the Good Guide. You can listen on all platforms, wherever you listen to your podcast. But really, the point behind the Good Guide was just exactly what I was saying at the very beginning as I was introducing myself. Earlier on in my career, while I was fortunate, I did have mentors. I did have people that opened doors for me. What I didn't necessarily have was a guide to how to make these decisions, how to sift through the gajillion different ideas in my head or desires or passions and create them or make them into reality. And so for me, it was really about creating a space for women who have professional ambitions and who don't maybe always know how to go about them or how to voice them or just how to really break the mold and be bold and make big life-changing decisions. And so that's really what the Good Guide is about. I really just love speaking to women and allowing them to pursue their goals and passion. So yeah.
Nice. Awesome.
Yeah.
Shanarra, thank you so much for being here today. What a great conversation.
Yes.
I love all the insight that you've shared. So many practical tips that, because we all think we're in it by ourselves, right?
Yes,
and we think,
exactly.
oh, we're the only person that feels this way.
Mm-hmm,
and so that's part of the point of the WIL Women in Leadership Talk podcast is to really get conversations started, get people talking about, how do we support each other, right? And how do we connect? So thank you for doing this today and being here with us.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me, Vicki. It was so good to see you again.
Oh, you as well. My pleasure. And you know what? Let me take a second. I want to thank our audience for being here. You guys are fantastic. We're in 50 plus countries, which means the world to us that you're chiming in, you're listening. Please do share. Give us a review. Let us know how we're doing, what topics you'd like to hear more of. We so value your feedback. And I'm just going to kick into the topic of networking. If that is an area that you're struggling with, you need help. If you visit our Women in Leadership Empowered website, you'll see that we actually offer an on-demand networking course. So happy to have you check that out. We'll help you. We'll support you in finding your authentic groove when it comes to connections. So thanks again, everybody, for being here. And we'll see you on the next Women in Leadership Talk podcast. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for WIL Talk, sponsored by Women in Leadership Empowered. To learn more about our programs, please visit www.wilempowered.com. We look forward to seeing you in our community.